It was tough. I mean, in terms of the job, to tell people what India meant, what India stood for, and to push the diplomatic relationship was quite challenging, but it was good fun. It was very hard. And I really used to curse myself when I had to do homework, because you are in university, you go through your exams, then you give the toughest exam possible in India, that is the UPSC. You get through, you get the foreign service, and you feel you've done with exams, but then you land up in Madrid. I was single, I was alone, I used to live in an apartment and invited me. So there was a gentleman sitting next to me who started speaking to me. And when he heard that I was from India, he said, "No, I can't believe it, because your Spanish is just so good." I said, no, please, it's not that good also. So he was a cellist, and he said, "Oh, I'm going to my hometown, and Bilbao is my home. So what are you doing in the evening?" I said, "I'm doing particularly nothing, and I've never seen Bilbao." He said, No, I'll come with my sisters, and we'll show you Bilbao." I never believed it. I said, people say all kinds of things. You will not believe it. At 7 o'clock, there was this huge car which came with at least 6 sisters. This gentleman. Country. It's a fascinating country. Young diplomats should travel there. They should travel a lot and see every part of the country, see how, each region is different from the other.
Hola y bienvenidos otra vez a un episodio muy especial, una entrevista muy especial de mi canal de YouTube Español por Dentro. En esta serie de charlas que estoy haciendo con gente de diferentes campos de vida, la vida diplomática también es un aspecto muy importante, porque son los diplomáticos que nos ayudan a fortalecer las relaciones entre países y entre regiones. Y hoy tengo una diplomática muy especial que ha hecho su carrera en posiciones muy importantes en el Ministerio de Exterior del Gobierno de la India. Y tengo conmigo la señora Riva Ganguly Das. Thank you so much, ma'am, for being here on my channel Español por Dentro.
Thank you. Muchas gracias y hola a todos.
Okay, so at the behest of Ms. Das, this interview is going to happen in English, although I'm pretty sure that Ms. Das is well versed with Spanish, but for the convenience of this interview, we're going to do this in English. Is that fine, ma'am?
Yes. My Spanish is a little rusted now. No sale las palabras, ya sabes.
Okay, pero creo que si practicas más vas a hablar bien.
Sí, tengo que practicar. Okay. Entiendo mejor que hablo, pero de las palabras, tengo que buscar las palabras.
Okay. Well, maybe during the course of this interview, I can coax Ms. Das into speaking a bit of Spanish. So we'll see how that goes. So firstly, thank you so much, Ms. Das, for being on this channel. For me, it's an absolute honor to have you. Let me give a brief introduction of Ms. Das for my public. Riva Ganguly Das is an Indian diplomat who has served in various key positions in the Indian Foreign Service. She was the former High Commissioner of India to Bangladesh and has also served as Secretary East in the Ministry of External Affairs. Throughout her career, she has played a significant role in strengthening India's diplomatic relations, particularly in South Asia. And you must be wondering after this introduction as to there's been no mention of Spain or Latin America in this intro. But that is what we're going to explore through this interview with Ms. Das. So firstly, Ms. Das, I would like you to please share with us in what position, what capacity were you in Spain, and what were your first impressions of Spain when you arrived there?
Well, my Spain was my first posting. As you know, when you join the Indian Foreign Service, you're allocated a language. So the language allocated to me was Spanish. And those days we went to Madrid to learn the language. So I landed up in Madrid. This was the first time I was traveling abroad. First time I went out of India. And the impression of being driven from Madrid Barajas to my apartment was so vivid that even after so many years, I went in 87, I still remember that evening so vividly, the smell, the sound, the lights and the streets. So Spain left a huge impression on me. And my job there was, because I was a probationary officer, I was new in the job. I'd just done 1 year of training. And here I was sent to learn the language. So initially I joined a private school, Spanish school, because the Complutense courses were still a few months away and I didn't want to waste time. And once Complutense courses for foreigners started, I joined the university. So it was fabulous learning Spanish in Spain.
Wow, fantastic. And so, Ms. Das, how did you adapt to the Spanish culture and way of life? The fact that that was your first trip abroad. So I'm sure there must have been a few challenges for you to adapt to their culture and their way of life. So could you share a little bit about that?
It was initially it was a huge learning experience because Europe is culturally very different from the rest of the world. I think those days, especially I'm talking about the late 80s, Europeans tend to be a little more formal, and because we get our impression about the world outside India mostly from films, books that we read, and your European culture, I found, was a little more formal. Spain was, but I'll add a contradiction here that, even though culturally, Europe in general is more formal, I think Spaniards tend to be very, very warm, informal people. They embraced me with absolutely open arms. They loved my wrong Spanish and always praised whatever nonsense I spoke to them. And they said, "Oh my God, you got such a good accent. You speak so well." So, and fortunately, I had a huge bunch of friends who did not know English at all. So, it was like being thrown into the deep side of the pool. And I learned Spanish by speaking to them, communicating with them, and it was really very, very interesting. I think culturally it's very different. You have to learn how, like for instance, you have to learn that when you go out in the evening, you have to wear formal leather shoes. You can't just turn up in anything. So dressing up, how to speak, etc. You had to learn, but I don't think that was too difficult. But definitely I would add that, India in those days was not very well known. And in Spain, when I said I'm a diplomat from De La India, I had to literally dig into a map and show them where De La India was, because, people had, because Spain was also coming out really, after years of Franco, and so it was tough. I mean, in terms of the job to tell people what India meant, what India stood for, and to push the diplomatic relationship was quite challenging, but it was good fun.
It's wonderful, ma'am, that you talk about the professional challenges, because that was my next question to you as a diplomat. What challenges did you face? So you spoke a little bit about the fact that Spain was coming out of the Franco era at that point of time, and to even show India on the map for you was probably challenging. So, as a diplomat, could you share what kind of challenges did you face in Spain? A little bit more about that.
Well, I was a very junior diplomat, so I really didn't have many of the big, heavy responsibilities that one gets later on in life. And but certainly, I was looking after what we call information culture, then, promoting soft power of India. I did travel a lot in Spain, basically promoting India, because as I said, one of the biggest challenge was that people didn't know what India was, where India came from, and what, our vibrant democracy, what we stood for. And as a woman ambassador, as a woman diplomat, that was also a little unusual. So that those were some of the challenges, and also we must keep in mind the fact that in '87 there was no European Union, there was no Schengen, there was no European currency. So all countries in Europe were different. The whole the way foreign policy was conducted was very different, and during my time, there was a very important visit by Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi. In fact, that was one of the things I remember most about my posting in Spain.
Okay. Well, ma'am, going forward to talking about a little bit about language and the fact that you did learn Spanish for your work. So how did you navigate the language barriers while working in Spain? Did any particular memory you have in terms of the language?
See, initially, it was very hard. And I really used to curse myself when I had to do homework, because you are in university, you go through your exams, then you give the toughest exam possible in India, that is the UPSC. You get through, you get the foreign service, and you feel you've done with exams, but then you land up in Madrid. I was single, I was alone, I used to live in an apartment, and then suddenly you found that you had to do piles and piles of homework. You had to write essays in Spanish, and we had spoken Spanish also. My spoken Spanish I was not worried about, because it was I could speak. I mean, I learned how to speak, but written Spanish is, it's a different this thing. So I really struggled the first few months, I have to say. But then living in a country where that's the only language which is spoken around you, and remember, this was when satellite TV was just coming in, so there was hardly any English television, and all over the place you saw these little boards saying learning less, learning less. So very few people knew English those days. So it was very hard. And in terms of, interesting experience, so I had a lady who used to come and, clean up my place and all. And so she used to come on, if I remember correctly, Fridays. So I had a cousin over, and we had invited some friends over for tea in the evening, and we served tea, in a nice teapot, Darjeeling tea cozy and everything. And the lady kept telling her husband that the tea is a little salty. And, we looked at each other. We said, there's something wrong with these Spaniards. Why would they call, the tea is not salty. We put sugar. So after they left, we wanted to investigate what had happened. And we went to the kitchen and saw that the maid wrote in a little note that, I broke the salt, the bottle in which it kept salt. And by mistake, I've mixed the salt and the sugar.
Okay. You saw the note quite late. Yeah.
Quite late. And because she was also not very educated, the note was also not very clear. Had we seen the note before the guests complained about the salty tea, maybe we couldn't even have, understood what she said.
So she had written it in Spanish, right?
She had written it in Spanish, and my Spanish was very bad then. So my cousin's Spanish was better. So we sort of, figured out that she had mixed up the salt and sugar, and we landed up giving our guests some terrible tea.
Okay, that's very interesting. Very interesting anecdote, ma'am. And when you say that your spoken Spanish was much better than your written, and that comes as a bit of a surprise to me, because generally students when they're learning Spanish, they seem to be more comfortable writing rather than speaking. Speaking, in fact, is one of the weakest links for any Spanish student generally. But is it the fact that you were in Spain and you were in touch with people around you who were speaking Spanish? Was that the reason that made your spoken Spanish a little bit more comfortable for you?
Absolutely. Because you see, if you are in a country, I mean, I was very young then. I'd just given the exam. This was my first posting. I wanted to explore. I wanted to see Spain. And, when I landed there, I found that there was this wonderful organization called Tagore Society. Mm-hmm. And the president of Tagore Society was a Spanish writer and well-known, writer called Leoncio. And Leoncio became a very good friend of mine, and Leoncio did not know a word of English. And I did not know Spanish then. So, it was very funny because I used to attend their meetings. I got to know a lot of poets, writers, artists. I did not know Spanish much, but, just listening to them and being in that atmosphere, I absorbed the language. It just absorbed to the extent that, once I had visited the UK, and because British English is spoken in a very different accent from our English, right? So the English sounded a little alien. And when I landed back in Barajas, when I heard the Spanish announcement, I felt, oh my God, I've heard my mother tongue again. I was so close to Spanish by then. It seemed closer to my heart than even English, because it was the language which I heard around me all the time. Your staff, because I often took public transport also. So to ask where to get down, sit down, this, that. So one learned. And you have to be a little unself-conscious in the beginning. And even if you're speaking wrong Spanish, just go on and, just be at it. Eventually, you'll speak the correct way. So I think, being young helped at that point.
No, I think, and very important, I think, for all the viewers who are listening and watching this, because a lot of my followers are students, ma'am. So I think what you've just said makes a lot of sense, that you need to shed your inhibitions and really speak. It doesn't matter even if it's incorrect at the beginning, and to be able to make those errors and learn from them. So that's a good point. So, ma'am, of course, you shared a very hilarious incident of the tea case. But any other memorable experiences during your time as a diplomat there that you still remember fondly?
I remember something very fondly, which was, Rajiv Gandhi's visit. Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi visited Spain. This was a visit which took place after a very long gap. And it was a very landmark visit because it was a recognition by India and Spain that, we were two countries which could do business, which could take on the bilateral relation forward. So the day Prime Minister arrived, the program was that he was coming by the usual VVIP aircraft, which would land at the airport and at the special Air Force base. And from there, he would be taken by chopper to the Prime Minister's residence for the formal guard of honor. The guard of honor and all happened then and there. So the Prime Minister landed, and we were all there in the lineup, small embassy, all officers were there. And since I was looking after media, press and media during that visit, so I did not have any particular job at the reception end, because we were just receiving the Prime Minister. And after that, my job was to go back to doing my own work. So after Prime Minister arrived and he got onto the helicopter, suddenly there was a huge crisis because, all the baggage was came from the Indian aircraft, but there were no trucks or, whatever, the vehicles had not got permission to enter the Air Force base. So there was a little communication gap. One could see that the trucks were lined up. The vehicles were lined up, the cars and all were lined up, but the baggage could not be moved from the tarmac. I was the only Spanish-speaking officer there. And because this was such a formal event, so I very nicely dressed up in a sari, I was wearing heels and all. And then suddenly, I was told that, oh gosh, now get going and get the permission because you have to move the baggage. So the first thing I did was I took out my slippers, took them in my hand and ran, to the control center, got in touch with the head of the Air Force chap who was the head. And it took me about 15-20 minutes to sort that out. So people started talking about me as the young officer who ran around with the slippers in her hand, trying to solve baggage problems. So that was very, very memorable. And my language skill really came in handy because the officers who were there did not speak English. So I had to tell them that, this has been a little faux pas that the trucks didn't have permission, because there's a lot of baggage, a lot of people come on those VIP aircrafts, and PM's banquet was that evening. The banquet speech had to be printed, that had to be, all these formalities had to be done. So it was quite an experience. It was quite a start to the visit, rather, let me put it.
Wonderful, great. So, Ms. Das, how would you describe the diplomatic relations between Spain and India during your time? So maybe I'm talking about the 90s, and how was it at that point of time?
80s, in fact. I went in 87.
Okay.
Yeah, and Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi's visit was in 88.
Yeah.
So, you know that India and Spain established relations in 1956. And thereafter, I think around in the late 60s, Savai Madho Singh, the erstwhile Maharaja of Jaipur, was sent as the first ambassador of India to Spain. And after democracy was established in Spain, relations became, relations saw a sort of take a form. But it was Prime Minister's visit in 88 which really started off a new phase in the relationship. And, because as I mentioned to you, that India was not very well known before that. And I remember that before the visit, big interviews had come out in the El País and all. And, El País covered the visit. Naturally, the visit was there. But India was not, in the state it is now, a coveted power. Everybody wants to come and do investments here. And, India is globally recognized as one of the fastest moving economies. So that was not so in the late 80s. But an important, significant, political contact at the highest level is always very important in any visit. And I was lucky to be in Spain where such a contact took place. And now, of course, the visit is flourishing besides the relationship that we have through the European Union. India-Spain relations are doing very well. But here I must add that, cultural contact, which comes through the Indologist, Spanish-speaking Indologists, as well as Hispanics from India, has always been a very strong bond. And the fact that Juan Ramon Jimenez, translated Tagore long back, people in Spain are very, very familiar with Tagore's work. And later on, because of Victoria Ocampo, I think Tagore was always well known in Spain. And that cultural connect has always been quite strong, despite the political contact not being that strong during the late 80s. But we always found a large number of, serious scholars who were interested in India, who were working on India. Now, of course, you have the Cultural Center in Valladolid, Casa de la India, and Cervantes Institute in Delhi. And a lot of good work is happening.
Great. So, ma'am, what aspects of Spanish culture have had the most influence on you personally speaking?
Well, I think, there is a lot to learn about Spanish history, culture. It's a very rich history. They've had, several years of Moorish Islamic culture also, which is so evident when you travel to south of Spain, Sevilla, Granada, Cordoba. And the Catholic traditions are also very strong. I was lucky to be in Sevilla for Semana Santa. So,
wow.
I've seen, it's just absolutely fascinating. Between the food, which is, about which Spaniards are totally passionate, and the bullfight and the music, the flamenco, I think it's a very, very rich culture. And look at the literature. Spanish literature is so deep and so rich. And I must also add that Spain itself is a very diverse country. It's not as if, it's the same sort of food is eaten all over. There is a thing called an accent. Accent is a big deal in Spanish language. You and your students would, of course, know. Even now, when my Spanish is so rusted, when I say tell a Spaniard that I learned Spanish in Madrid, so they say, oh, you have learned in Madrid, your accent, the way we come up with the words. So, but I mean, look at Bilbao, San Sebastian, and Sevilla, and Valencia, Burgos. They're very, very different from each other. Every place has its own peculiarities, its own special culture. So it's very fascinating country. There's so much that it offers. Not only as a tourist, I'm lucky that I was posted there. I lived there for 2.5 years, and I was able to travel a lot. And I really, I loved every minute of it.
Wow, wonderful. I can just imagine, someone like you just exploring the beautiful country, because I have myself also visited it a few times, but till now, I mean, I've never had the chance to live there. But just the fact that you've lived there for 2.5 years is something that's the best way to explore and appreciate the culture. So that's fantastic, ma'am. Yeah. And
also, sorry, I just
Yes,
very
please.
tempted to tell you a little story.
Yeah.
I was once traveling to Bilbao on a flight, and I was going to do a television interview. By a local TV channel had invited me. So there was a gentleman sitting next to me who started speaking to me. And when he heard that I was from India, he said, "No, I can't believe it because your Spanish is just so good." I said, "No, please, it's not that good also." So he was a cellist, and he said, "Oh, I'm going to my hometown, and Bilbao is my home. So what are you doing in the evening?" I said, "I'm doing particularly nothing, and I've never seen Bilbao." He said, "No, I'll come with my sisters, and we'll show you Bilbao." I never believed it. I said, people say all kinds of things. You will not believe it. At 7 o'clock, there was this huge car which came with at least 6 sisters, this gentleman. And, it was just so much fun. And, I'm so sorry, there's a call coming in.
No worries. That's fine. That's fine. You can take the call, ma'am.
So it was, this is the warmth of the Spanish people. This is the friendliness, and this is so unique to Spain. This is
Absolutely.
The people of Spain are very, 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 very warm, nice, and friendly people.
Absolutely. I can endorse that completely because I have myself experienced that, ma'am. And if at any point of time further during this interview you're tempted to tell any other interesting story, please do, because that's the motive, ma'am, of this interview with you, to come up with as many wonderful incidents or memories that you have. So,
Right.
as you said that you were young at that point of time, that was your first posting. So, any particular goals did you have during your posting in Spain? Any particular things that you felt that before you went, these are the things that I needed to achieve, and you feel you were able to achieve them?
Look, I think one was, of course, giving the exam and getting, passing the exam, because that's an important thing. And the Spanish exam is both written and a viva. You have to do a conversation with the professor in Complutense, and you're marked on the basis of that. So that was a big goal, that you had to do your exam. And also, I think during that time, because I was quite involved in what we were doing culturally, we were very keen to explore, a sort of joint production of flamenco and Kathak. And one worked with, people in India and the flamenco, big flamenco names in Spain at that time. A big joint production did not come up then, but as you would know that later on, I think it did happen. I have myself seen joint Kathak and flamenco production, and it really feels so good to see that, because, when you see a flamenco performance and when you hear the music, you can obviously find things which are very similar to, you try to find that there must be somewhere, roots of this must be same somewhere. So that was something I wanted to do. But I mean, everybody can't. We started the process, and it was lovely that it happened later on eventually.
You sowed the seeds for that to happen. So, yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, at that time we were very keen to start that process.
Okay. So, ma'am, coming towards the final few questions of this interview. So, this particular question is something that I was very keen to ask you. How do you think the relationship between Spain and India can be further strengthened? And I want to actually mix it with a couple of other questions. One is that, do you think that at that point of time when you lived in Spain as a young diplomat, all those years ago in the late 80s, from there to now, in all these years, do you think that Spain and India have been able to tap the potential that they have for forging a strong bilateral relationship, or do you think that over the years things have not sort of panned out as well as they could have or they should have? Why I ask you, ma'am, is that, when I go to Spain, as recently as last year when I went to Andalusia. That was one region which I wanted to explore, and I used to speak to people over there, and even now, I mean, talking about 2024. People in Spain don't know much about India. I mean, I obviously, as a common layperson, I'm talking to the common people over there. A lot of them don't know much about India at all, which is very surprising and disappointing as well, that we live in such a globalized world. And if at all people would know, they would talk about, still, I mean, it's still something that I tell you, ma'am, that they talk about a land of snake charmers, or
Yeah.
either it's that, or the media always portrays aspects of probably pollution in the northern part of the country during winter time, or too much of population, too many people. So these are some of the common words that come, and people, either they haven't traveled to India at all, or they know very little about India. They know that they don't know what kind of languages we speak. So a lot of aspects are there about India that even now in today's modern world, people in Spain are not aware. So is that what do you put that down to? Is it down to the Spanish people not being open enough to a country like India, or do you think that somewhere our diplomatic relations, we've not been able to tap that potential as better as we should have? What is your take on this, ma'am?
See, I think I wouldn't say that Spaniards are indifferent or something. I think they are very preoccupied with their overall interests in Latin America, where there is an obvious connection of language, culture, family ties. It's a very, very strong relationship that they have. That takes up a lot of space, mind space, in the in the minds of ordinary Spaniards. Every Spaniard thinks a lot about Latin America and what happens to the rest of the Spanish-speaking world. So that's a from the perspective of countries from the south, then we miss out a little bit. And I think more effort needs to be done by everybody, not only government, because government can do only that much. There needs to be more student exchanges, more scholarships, more chairs, and it's not Spanish language teaching in India is not did not start yesterday. It has been a long tradition of Spanish teaching in the JNU has had a Spanish department for many, many years. They've been very senior Spanish teachers. There are so that all is there. But I think for any average European country, the European Union is preoccupies their interests a lot. What is happening in Europe, and especially the politics of European Union, and how things are moving. And in the case of Spain, I think a lot of the interest gets focused on the rest of the Spanish-speaking world, mostly largely Latin America. So, but we have to work on that a little bit, so that and I think here films can play an important role, because even in the 80s I saw the Spaniards do a lot of joint productions. They used to have joint production with Italians. I've seen lovely Spanish-Italian productions, and so that sort of things can definitely happen, because Spain is very much in our mind space because of the fabulous Bollywood film, which was such a hit, the name of which I cannot remember right now, with the fabulous music. So, Zindagi Na Milegi Dobara. Yeah. So, that brought Spain so much into people's minds. People saw this fabulous country. So I think soft power plays an important role. And it is always a combined effort of the entire society, civil society, academic, students, everybody together.
Yeah, interesting. So, my final question to you, ma'am, is about what advice would you give to future diplomats being posted to Spain from your own experience?
See, Spain, there is a lot of opportunities of doing business with Spain. As you know, Spain is I think it's our sixth largest trading partner in Europe with 9.9 billion trade. There is substantive Spanish investments in India in pharma sector, in IT, and I think we have some investments in automobile. So, and the biggest success story recently has been the Scene 295 joint production at Vadodara, for which the Spanish president was here.
Yeah.
I mean, a visit after a gap of 18 long years. So, there has to be greater political engagement. And for young diplomats, I would suggest that, a lot of young diplomats get posted to Spain to learn the language. I think people need to explore that country. It's a fascinating country. Young diplomats should travel there. They should travel a lot and see every part of the country, see how, each region is different from the other. And that's a huge learning process. And I always feel that reading literature of the country where you're posted is very important, and seeing plays and, like when I was in Spain, I went and saw Sarsuela. And, I had to see a Sarsuela, and I still remember the taxi driver who brought me home because, he dropped me in the street. It ends quite late, and I had to walk down up to my door and open the door and go in. I mean, he said that, Senorita, I will not leave till you go inside, lock up the front gate, wave at me. I'll wait for you till then. See, these are things which really touch you. I mean, why would he be interested? First, he said, why are you up so late at night wandering around the streets? I said, I'd gone to see a Sarsuela. Then he said, you should be careful, because Spain was not that safe those days. And, there was a lot of mugging and all. He said, it's very dangerous when you're opening the door of your apartment with your key. So I'll wait till you open the door, go in, you wave at me that you've entered safely, and then I'll leave you.
Wow.
So such a sweet man.
Yeah, I think such gestures always stay with you in your heart forever. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, great. I've also had some wonderful experiences with people. So yeah, I mean, people in Spain are very warm and much more, I guess, open than probably countries in the northern part. So, but ma'am, thank you so much for this lovely interview. You shared some very interesting anecdotes and memories of your time in Spain. I'm sure people who have listened to this and have watched it on YouTube and listened to it on Spotify will definitely would have enjoyed listening to your experiences. And thank you so much for taking out the time for this interview. And it's a pleasure to have you. So thank you once again.
Thank you so much, and thank you for letting me share some of my wonderful memories with your students and you and those who are listening in. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you so much. So that was Riva Ganguly Das, former diplomat, and it's an absolute pleasure to have her. So until the next episode, hasta el siguiente capítulo de Español por Dentro. Ciao.